Welcome to our office hour, and this office hour is intentionally for it's the emergency assistance for non-public schools, so our non-public schools. I know we set up the meeting and sent it out. It draws the email contacts from our Eans applications, and so if you're in the meeting and you're not interested in the non-public aspect of what we're talking about, don't feel like you have to stay through this meeting. But we are going to go forward with our office hour. Again, it's Wednesday, the 9th of February, 2022. We're going to get started now. We are recording, and you'll have a chance to see the slides down the road. If you need them, they'll be on our website. And we are from the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs. And I think Rob is going to click to our next slide. Thank you. I am Kevin Harrington. I'm the Gear and Eans coordinator. And the other folks, I think, are going to introduce themselves.
I'm Robert Palmer. I'm the management analyst, and I am transitioning to help out with the Eans team. So you'll be seeing my face a little bit more.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shelley Shassy-Jandro, and I'm the director of the Office of Emergency Relief Programs. Again, as Kevin mentioned at the top of the hour, this office hour is really designed for our non-publics who have interest in participating in potentially ARP Eans and or are participating in the CRISA Eans program. So if you happen to be a public school official, this meeting may not be pertinent for you, and we know that your time is extremely valuable. So we just want to be sure to provide you with that information at the top of the hour so that you could determine the best need and use of your time. If you happen to be a public school who has a specific question, go ahead and put that specific question directly to me in the chat box, and we will tend to it to be sure that you're provided the support that you may need.
All right, today's topics, we're going to be talking about CRISA Eans reallocation process, the ARP Eans, providing you some information on that, inventory and reporting dates, and then we'll have a question and answer phase, and then we'll also be for anyone that was looking for information about the reimbursement process that we covered in January, we'll be providing some information as needed on that.
Great. I'll do the next few slides. And so if you think of Eans 1, you may hear it Eans 1, CRISA Eans 1. This is our reallocation option. And we're going to go through here a few of the slides that we hope will clean things up a little bit for you. Just note that we do have the actual link is live on our landing page, the same page that you folks have been going into to look at your application in GEMS. So I'll just go down through a few of these, but this will be a repeat in some of it for you and perhaps some new information at the bottom. But so again, CRISA Eans reallocation process, and here's some things that it's going to be. The application will be available at the 4pcamain.org site that you're accustomed to going to. We're going to send it out. Everything's going to be live today. And I will get an email out to everybody just as a reminder when we conclude this office hour. We would like, if you are going to participate, we would certainly be happy if you could get it to us by the date and time that we have it on there. We're trying to give everybody 30 days to get that squared away, decide if you're going to participate, and then to fill out the application. When you think of the application, by the way, when you get to look at it, very straightforward, simple thing compared to the larger one that we originally processed with all the things that you had to kind of comply with. On the top right, you see that yellow rectangle. So when you get to the landing page, that's what you're going to see. And you'll see the second dot down with the Eans reallocation. And that information, once you click onto there, you'll be up and into the place where you need to be. That second piece down below, please confirm participation. Just like with anything, we want to make sure we know that you would like to be part of it or you would not like to. And that application will give you a chance to tell us that. Just making sure that we haven't overlooked anybody that wants to participate. So if you will keep that in mind as you're filling out that application, that would be great. Okay, so this is familiar things that you're going to see. This kind of a budget looking form. I know you folks have seen, and especially if you're doing not only the original application, but also the invoicing process for reimbursement. So you see a lot of these things that intentionally are not different. So at the beginning there, if you have additional needs and you would like to ask for some funds, you'd go ahead in that large blue arrow box. That's where that would go. and then you would see down on the bottom right corner where that same number would show up.
So just to clarify, if you don't mind going to the one page back, Rob, just to clarify, these are Carissa Eans funding. So essentially what has transpired in this time is you folks as non-publics had an opportunity to engage in this funding last summer. And the funding was available to you folks through an application process very similar to the one that you see on the screen currently. You had colleagues in other non-publics who determined that they were no longer going to participate, which made funding available because they had had an established allocation and then determined that there was no longer a need or a desire to participate in the Carissa Eans funding. So our team has been working with the US Department of Education to navigate what that means for the remaining of the non-publics who are indeed participating in the Carissa Eans funding. And they've indicated, the US Department of Education has indicated that our proposed project of reallocating these funds based on additional needs that our non-publics who participated in Carissa Eans might have, we can engage in that reallocation process with the folks who have determined that they may have some additional needs that were not supported in the original Carissa Eans funding. So that's why we refer to this pot of money as reallocation, but essentially it is the first federal emergency Eans program that came to fruition under Carissa, which was December of 2020. Just to kind of help keep all these pieces together, because there is a lot of puzzle pieces in the work that we do, and we just want to be sure that you see the connections and how they're all interrelated.
Continuing on with, again, Carissa Eans reallocation. The reallocated funds, you're going to follow all the same rules that we did on the original allocation, and the allowability necessary and reasonableness. That's kind of the litmus test for this. And there is some information on our website that helps with that if you haven't thought of that for a while. Anything purchased is still the Department of Education is the title owner, if you will. Services procured by the Maine Department of Education, and don't feel like you got to memorize these. They'll all be right there for you. Reimbursements for expenses prior to April 26, 2021. That's a date you've seen on the original application. No services or assistance for which the non-public school already received PPP funding. So that's the Paycheck Protection Funds, ESSER Equitable Services, or Coronavirus Relief Fund, the CFR funding, services, or assistance will be submitted. And finally, as far as the Eans Carissa goes, and by the way, feel free that you can always, as you have been doing, you can call us directly and email and so forth to connect with us if some of this later on is confusing. So right now, pretty straightforward. If the original Eans application needs to be revised, I just want to point this one out. To utilize more of the allocation, all changes would need to be completed by March 11th, 2022. And for this, you're going to be familiar with this slide. The allocation in this example, $150,000. What was actually asked for down in the green box of $149,370. That would leave $630 that was not requested. So all unbudgeted funds would be reallocated to the non-public schools who identify additional needs. So those pieces that are there that were not asked for is what part is going to be making up the reallocation fund. And if you have a need to use that, then please do let us know, and we can always reopen your application and so forth to make those changes.
So I'm just going to take a minute to pause right there, because for the first 7 or so slides of the PowerPoint, we are really discussing the Carissa Eans funding and what happens to the remaining of the funding that was either unbudgeted from our non-publics or an allocation that was denoted to a non-public that is no longer participating. So I just want that material to kind of sit for a moment to see if there's any questions. As I've mentioned, we are monitoring the chat box and I haven't seen any questions. But before we shift to sort of the next topic area, which is a completely different funding source, it came about in the American Rescue Plan. It's still referred to as Eans, and at times it's referred to as Eans 2. So before we shift to that new funding source, I just want to check to see if there's any questions that we can address in regards to the process in which a non-public would self-select to either participate in the reallocation of Carissa Eans or identify that there's no longer any needs. So there's a question in the chat box, and it is reference to, Rob, if you don't mind going back, I think it's one slide. So this page in particular, right, this is in reference to the original Carissa Eans application. And the question in the chat box says, if there's revisions that need to be made, they need to be made by Friday, March 11th. And that is accurate because as Kevin highlighted, those unbudgeted funds, the ones in red here that have been denoted, which is the difference between the original allocation for that school and the application in which that school submitted, those funds are going to be part of the reallocated funds. So essentially it's increasing potentially the funding that we can reallocate to non-publics who have indicated there is a need and a desire to have some additional funding and services and goods that haven't been yet met with these funds. Perfect. So now we'll jump into ARP Eans 2. And as I mentioned, it is a second round of funding with the same sort of title. However, it came to fruition in the American Rescue Plan. And that plan and act came about through Congress in March of 2021. Of 2021. My apologies. It feels like we started this pandemic 2 weeks ago, but we know it was much longer than that indeed. As we are approaching the almost exactly 2-year mark. So ARP came about in 2021 and really focused in as an entirety. The act focused in on accountability, transparency, and serving students who were furthest from the opportunity or greatly impacted by COVID-19 at a disproportionate rate. And essentially that focused in on our students who are from families of low income. So again, the American Rescue Plan ARP Eans 2 funding is identical to the Carissa Eans funding with 2 exceptions. One of them being that there must be a prioritization for enrolling a significant percentage of students from low income families. And we highlighted that because you'll see on the very next slide, from the US Department of Education, that significant percentage was indeed just that, significant. And then the second component is there is no allowability for reimbursement. So essentially under ARP Eans, everything will be procured, goods and services from this date forward. So we are not going to be allowed to reimburse any expenses, which is very different than Carissa Eans, because we had that pre-award established, which essentially said any expenses from the onset of the pandemic, March 13th of 2020 on, could have been reimbursed. That clause is not allowable under ARP Eans. So as I mentioned, the significant percentage is important because this is a quota or a criteria that has been navigated through the US Department of Education. And the US Department of Education has asked every governor and Department of Education to apply for the ARP Eans funding, and indicates on the application that you must serve as a non-public 40% or more students from low income families. So essentially, what we did as a team is we looked at the data that we had, which was the small area income and poverty estimates, the SAPI data, which we used in regards to the Carissa Eans allocation that we generated for every school in the first Eans program. And only 2 participating non-public schools would have been served at that threshold at 40% plus. So essentially what our team did was we reviewed the application in conversation with the commissioner's office as well as the governor's office. We discussed this tiered approach that would essentially prioritize schools who were serving 40% plus on a tiered level approach, but would allow some of these funds to be utilized by all non-publics, just prioritizing the non-publics who had the higher percentage or closer to the 40% threshold. That application was submitted and was not successful. So that brought us back to the drawing table about, well, what is it that is a significant enough threshold to potentially have an approved application from the US Department of Education? So we actually had the opportunity to engage in the US Department of Education, in a conversation with the US Department of Education. And they said, we appreciate the tiered approach. It seems like you indeed are doing your due diligence in prioritizing the funds for our low-income families. However, we cannot, with this funding, we are not allowing every non-public who participated in Carissa to be served. There needs to be some sort of threshold that says, at this level, you can participate and you are eligible in ARP Eans 2. So we'll jump to the next slide and we'll sort of tell you where we are. And as it says at the bottom, this is really pending approval. So these conversations continue to have with our team, the commissioner's office and the governor's office, as well as with the US Department of Education. But right now our threshold that we are proposing is 25% with that same tiered approach. So the closer you are as a non-public to serve 40% low-income students from low-income families, the higher essentially the per pupil rate would be that would be generated in an allocation. Again, this has not been approved. These are still being reviewed by the commissioner and the governor's office before being resubmitted to the US Department of Education. And essentially what we had seen was the states who had indicated on their application that they would be served at 40%, that they would use the 40%, were quickly approved. Any state that used an alternative significant percentage threshold are still in that pending approval queue in regards to conversations with the US Department of Education, as well as their commissioner's office and the governor's office. So some things that potentially a non-public wants to think about to determine if they indeed are eligible, right? Because this is data that you folks will need to be able to produce and to either produce and or have a need to collect. So thinking about that threshold, if that threshold indeed was approved at 25% from the US Department of Education, you as a non-public would have to produce and or collect the information to establish the criteria that you've met the threshold. And essentially that is through determining the students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And again, this is all pending approval from the US Department of Education. However, we wanted to kind of give you a heads up so that if this indeed is information that you need to collect, that you have some time or some ways in which you might be able to collect the information. So the link we will hyperlink in the chat box here momentarily, but essentially that link is to the 2022 income guidelines for free reduced lunch that is available on the Maine Department of Education's website. And essentially the information that potentially you would need to collect from families is their family size, the family income, and student names. And essentially those student names are only for our non-public use, because The information that you would provide to the department in the ARP Eans application is how many kiddos do you have in your school and how many of them qualify for free and reduced lunch. And then the percentage would be determined based on the numerator and the denominator of those two entities that I just mentioned. And then that will create your eligibility criteria if you indeed meet that 25% threshold that is being proposed. So I'm just gonna, sorry, Rob, I'm gonna cut you off for just a moment because I know that that's a fair amount of information about something that is has yet to be approved. So I just want to be sure that if there's any questions that we have an opportunity to respond to those questions. Great, thank you, Wendy, for the feedback.
Good to go? All right, so now we're going to talk about inventory. In the grant award notification, attachment B, inventory requirements explain all property purchased or reimbursed through Carissa Eans must be properly inventoried. It is responsibility of non-public schools to have a procedure process identified for tracking and inventory property purchased. The procedure must meet the following federal requirements: 2 CFR Part 200.302B7 and 2 CFR Part 200.319C. An inventory worksheet has been developed to assist you with the process and can be found at the link provided here, which I believe we're going to get that in the chat so everybody can have readily access to that. Non-public schools will need to create an inventory tag. Each item will need to be tagged with the inventory number, the funding source, Carissa Eans, and the Maine Department of Education as the title holder. And below we have an example of a tag, an inventory number of 107, Carissa Eans, Maine Department of Education. And this is information regarding the inventory reporting dates. The inventory reporting needs to be submitted to the Maine Department of Education's Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs annually, along with final reports at the end of the grant period for the U.S. Department of Education. We provided the email address that you can send those into, which is eansprogram.doe@maine.gov. That is a shared Eans email account between Kevin and myself. So we do prefer that you use that instead of sending it to the individuals. That is a good email box to get any information or questions to us so we can respond in a more timely manner. Then we have the dates below, which is the annual due dates, which is January 31st of 2022 and January 31st of 2023, and the final due date of September 30th, 2023.
Okay, so on this one, we're going to give you a chance if you'd like to unmute yourself or ask anything in the chat. We'll certainly entertain that now. Also want to give you a chance to opt out if you would like to. The remainder of the slides we did cover in our first office hours for Eans back in January, and those are the slides and the video are on our website. So if you'd like to see those again, that's fine. However, we're going to basically monitor the folks that are here. And if you all go away, then we'll carry on and get the slides posted and so forth. But we will go on with our next group of slides to talk about reimbursement, and we'll share that and answer any questions that you might have. So at this point, if you would like to unmute yourself, that's wonderful. Otherwise, things in the chat. And if there are no other questions, we appreciate you being here. I noticed in the chat, we get the yikes, we missed the deadline for reporting. We're not going to show up in a big box truck and holler at you or anything. So if you can get that into us, that would be great. The form that we made, that the link is there, and we'll put that in the chat also, but also it's on our webpage, and it works out pretty well. So we've, even though there was quite a bit of kind of law quoted, if you just simply follow that sheet that we've made up in the tag, you're going to be fine.
Do you want to continue on, Kevin?
Yeah, and again, folks, if you are all set with reimbursement, the invoice, the piece of that, you're more than welcome to continue on with your day. If not, we're going to carry on. And I believe, Rob, you've got the first one.
Yes. All right, so now we're talking about reimbursement, preparing invoices and supporting documentation. Supporting documentation would include your, include your trial balance, which would have the dates of purchase, supplier, and the amounts. We'd also need paid invoices and receipts. Submitting documentation should be in sequential, reflecting the trial balance. Write the category name and the account on each invoice or purchase order, and please provide those in a PDF format. And here we can see the federal grant reimbursement system, and we're just highlighting a few sections where you would go to submit an invoice. And also down below on the bottom right, we also have the instructions for use of the federal grant reimbursement system. If anyone's having a hard time, that is a good informational source to be able to assist you in the invoicing process.
All right, I believe I'm going to pick it up from here. So the steps for reimbursement are right here. And we have been kind of talking through these on the last slideshow in office hour. But again, there's many folks I know have talked to directly. So here it is again. But choose a grant from the drop-down menu. And this is kind of a straightforward SOP, if you will. And then it gives you an option to simply select what you'd like to do, begin the reimbursement request. And then you have some kind of the timelines. We certainly try to do these as quickly as possible. And there are several grants where folks are invoicing out there within our team. But just kind of keep these dates in mind. Reimbursement requests are received by the Eans team and we process them within 10 business days. Then it goes off to DAFs, which is the accounting folks, financial side of it. Within 25 days is their piece. And then once approved, reimbursement checks will be received in the mail within 3 to 10 days. It is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Shelley, that mostly it seems to be checks, actual checks in the mail, but it does appear that there is the option of a routing number to get it to your account.
Correct. It's self-selected when you do the vendor code setup. So it is self-selected by the non-public if they would like to include accounting information to a bank account that would be directly deposited, or if they request physical mailed reimbursement checks.
Thank you. And when you go into the federal reimbursement system, just like you have been using that 4PC link, and you go in, and this is what you're going to see once you click on federal reimbursement system. You're going to see that. And the billing period, the billing date, which is kind of hidden under that red bar, that you might see a date that seems strange, but once you submit it, the right date will go in. The billing period is the piece we want to chat for a moment. So for instance, in this one, what do we have? We have the month of June 13th through, wouldn't you know it, it's June into July, because now you're going into a different fiscal year. We're gonna make an assumption that says May into June, and then so you're going for 1 month. So you're telling us what the billing period is, and then you'll see some other boxes that are in there. Down, I point out to where it says reimbursement. So if on your application there are some key dates that would let us know if it's a reimbursement or if it's going to be a future expense, a future expenditure, and the date is prior to April 26, 2021. Yes, and then after that date, it would then be on the future expense piece. But if you don't have that memorized, please just touch base with us on that one. The billing periods can be monthly or at most quarterly, so 3 months at a time, without spanning fiscal years. So that's why up above I looked at that. June 13th to 7/13. Okay, we've just kind of gone over another fiscal year, so that's a good wake up. And should be reflective of the dates of goods, the receipts and invoices, and can reflect back to the agreement start date, which was back on March 13, 2020. And always select reimbursement for this type.
And remember that this information is only currently related to Carissa Eans, because that reimbursement component will not be allowed under ARP Eans funding.
Okay. So this one is, I won't take you through it all, but it's kind of a by the numbers. If you take a look at number 1 down below, it tells you, it lines up with the numbers that are up above, and it gives you a chance to kind of really understand how that invoice works. Rob, if there's any other things you want to say about that, that's great.
No, I'm pretty sure that covers the basis, provides the information step by step.
Yeah. And it gives you kind of a nice visual of kind of what I had said on that last slide also. Okay. And the reimbursement request, indicate the total of each budget category for the allowable category within the budget line of the reimbursement request. So if you're following those 2 blue rectangles, that's where your information is going to go. And if you look kind of vertically, for instance, the 3,000 category, purchase services, if it happens to be a purchase service, it would go there. 4,000 to 6,000 on the, what I generally just call supplies, if it's a supply. So when it's all said and done, what makes me happy on the invoicing side is say you pick the month of March, and or whatever the month might be, and you're just going to do the whole month, the 30 days there, and then you're going to submit only receipts in March, and you have a trial balance that only indicates things in March. That makes it really easy for us to go through, and it processes a little quicker than in the past, if it's things are kind of not really in order. But if you go with that plan in mind, it really works out well. Couple of notes down here: when entering dollar amounts, do not use dollar signs or commas. The total should be reflected in the supporting documentation. So I look at it this way, that I want to be able to process it quickly for you so that you get your checks coming back to you. But also I look ahead to think, okay, if an auditor's in the room, what is he or she going to be thinking? Are they content that what we have is in order and they move on to something else, or they see it and they think it's a little confused and that upsets them, and they spend a lot of time looking at it. So I think the clearer we make it, the clearer it is when it comes in from you folks, clear that we're able to figure out what needs to be done. That works out well on the other side, known as auditing. And Rob.
Yeah, I believe this one's me. So this is for reimbursement still. Any purchase made prior to April 26, 2021 would be included in the budget for previously purchased, area, which is currently highlighted as a red example in the block below. And any purchase made after April 26 of 2021 would be included in the budget for future purchases area, which we have highlighted in the blue block below. Try saying blue block 3 times fast. It's proving to be a little difficult. So that's the examples that we have down below, just to give you a visual aid on that. And now we're at the second question and answer phase. If anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself, or you can submit a question in the chat box.
There was just a couple questions in the chat box, and I know I responded to them also in the chat box. However, I just want to sort of say them out loud for the recording as well as just for the greater good. So in regards to the federal grant reimbursement system and submitting reimbursements within the federal grant reimbursement system in GEMS, what will happen is the minute an invoice is submitted, a reimbursement request is submitted, that will essentially close the system for another update or another resubmission of a new invoice or reimbursement request until it has been reviewed and approved by our team, as well as from the Department of Administrative and Financial Services. So both of those 2 entities will need to review and approve that reimbursement request before the federal grant reimbursement system in GEMS will allow a new invoice to be submitted. And then if you go back 2 slides, I believe, Rob, sorry, 3. maybe even 4. So this one here, select type of funds requested. Regardless of if the expense is a reimbursement or a future expense within the Carissa Eans application, you will always select reimbursement here, because essentially what this reimbursement states is that the cost has already been incurred, whether it's 4 months ago or today. The cost has already been incurred, and you are seeking reimbursement for that cost, which is the only model that we use for our non-publics and for our RSAUs. The product, the good, the service has to be concluded before an invoice or a reimbursement request can be sought out for any of these federal emergency relief funds.
Okay, anything else in the chat? I don't see any others. If you folks do, holler. This will kind of sum up what we have. We will take a little bit of time to get our video and slides straightened out and up on our website. Again, the ones from the first office hour for Eans is already there, the slides and the video, and the same will happen with these. And as you're going through those, especially a day or two later, and you're not quite sure, please feel free to connect with us, email, and or give us a call or whatnot. We'll gladly help you right out. Here's our contact information, and it's all accurate, so feel free to use it. I know when I send it on email, I did add the link that gets you over to our website, and that can be helpful to find some pretty good information that's updated and ready to be used. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask us.